The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of my childhood bedroom, painting delicate shadows across the ivory wedding dress hanging on the door. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone, seeing 17 missed calls from my sister Rachel. Today was supposed to be her perfect day, the culmination of 3 years of planning, $200,000 of our parents' money, and countless hours of preparation. The grand ballroom at the Ritz-Carlton in Manhattan had been transformed into what she called her dream venue, with crystal chandeliers imported from Venice and flowers flown in from Ecuador. I stood there in my bridesmaid dress, a deep burgundy creation that cost more than my monthly rent, staring at my reflection and wondering how everything had spiraled so completely out of control. 6 months earlier, Rachel had asked me to be her maid of honor with tears in her eyes, holding my hands in that dramatic way she always did when she wanted something. We were sitting in our favorite coffee shop on the Upper West Side, the same place where we'd shared secrets since high school. She looked radiant, her engagement ring catching the afternoon light as she gestured excitedly about her plans. Marcus, her fiancé, sat beside her with that perfect smile that had charmed everyone in our family. He was everything Rachel had ever wanted in a partner. Successful investment banker, Harvard MBA, came from old money, and had the kind of jaw structure that belonged in cologne advertisements. My parents adored him, constantly reminding me that I should find someone like Marcus, someone who could provide stability and prestige. The wedding planning consumed our entire family's life. Every Sunday dinner became a strategy session about centerpieces, menu tastings, and seating arrangements. Rachel had spreadsheets for her spreadsheets, color-coded binders for each vendor, and a wedding planner named Vivian, who spoke in hushed tones like she was conducting sacred rituals. I watched my sister transform from the girl who used to sneak into my room at night to talk about boys into someone I barely recognized, someone who screamed at florists over the wrong shade of white roses and reduced caterers to tears over the temperature of the soup course. Marcus always stood by her side, rubbing her shoulders, telling her everything would be perfect, playing the role of the devoted fiancé with Oscar-worthy commitment. It was during one of these Sunday dinners in late March when I first noticed something was wrong. I had arrived early to help my mother with the cooking, and as I walked past the study, I heard Marcus on the phone. His voice was different, softer, more intimate than I'd ever heard him speak to Rachel. He was promising someone that after the wedding, things would be different, that he just needed to get through this, that the money from Rachel's trust fund would solve everything. My blood ran cold as I pressed myself against the wall, listening to him laugh about how naive Rachel was, how she believed every word he said, how his real life would begin once he had access to her inheritance. The conversation ended with him saying he loved someone, and it definitely wasn't my sister. I spent weeks agonizing over what to do. Every time I looked at Rachel's glowing face as she described their honeymoon plans for Bora Bora, my stomach churned. She would show me photos of the overwater bungalow they'd booked, talking about starting a family within the year, building their dream home in Westchester. Our mother had already started knitting baby blankets, convinced she'd be a grandmother by next Christmas. I tried dropping hints, asking Rachel if she was sure about Marcus, if they'd discussed finances, if she really knew him as well as she thought. She would laugh, that tinkling laugh that masked her insecurity, and tell me I was being paranoid, that I was jealous because I was 32 and still single, still living in a studio apartment in Queens while she was about to have everything. The rehearsal dinner at Daniel on the Upper East Side was where everything began to unravel. 200 of our closest family and friends gathered in the private dining room, raising champagne glasses to toast the happy couple. Marcus gave a speech that brought tears to everyone's eyes, talking about how Rachel had changed his life, how he couldn't wait to spend forever with her. I watched from my seat at the head table, my own champagne untouched, as he performed for the crowd. That's when I saw her. A woman at the back of the room, standing near the service entrance, wearing a server's uniform but clearly not working. She had long black hair and eyes that never left Marcus. When their gazes met across the room, I saw him falter mid-sentence, just for a moment, before recovering with a joke that had everyone laughing. After dinner, I followed the woman outside. She was crying on the sidewalk, mascara running down her cheeks. Her name was Elena, and she had been with Marcus for 5 years. They lived together in an apartment in Brooklyn that Rachel didn't know existed. She showed me photos on her phone of them together, Recent ones, from just last week when Marcus had told Rachel he was at a business conference in Boston. Elena was pregnant, 3 months along, and Marcus had promised her that after the wedding, after he got Rachel's money, they would disappear together. He had told Elena that the marriage was just a business arrangement, that Rachel meant nothing to him, that it was all about securing their future. Elena had come to the rehearsal dinner to see for herself if it was true, if Marcus could really go through with it. I stood there on that sidewalk, holding this stranger while she sobbed, feeling the weight of the truth crushing me. Elena begged me not to say anything, terrified that Marcus would leave her if his plan was exposed. She believed he loved her, that he was doing this for them, for their baby. I wanted to shake her, to make her see that Marcus was playing everyone, but I saw the desperation in her eyes, the same desperation I'd seen in Rachel's when she talked about finally finding the one. 2 women, both in love with a man who deserved neither of them, and I was caught in the middle with information that would destroy everything. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my hotel room, staring at my bridesmaid dress, replaying every moment of the last 3 years. I thought about all the times Marcus had been so perfect, so attentive, so everything Rachel had dreamed of. I thought about my parents, who had spent their retirement savings on this wedding, believing they were investing in their daughter's happiness. I thought about the 400 guests who would arrive tomorrow expecting to witness a fairy tale. And I thought about Elena, alone and pregnant in Brooklyn, clinging to promises from a man who had built his entire life on lies. The sun was rising over Manhattan when I finally made my decision. The morning of the wedding arrived with perfect June weather, cloudless skies and a gentle breeze that everyone said was a good omen. The bridal suite at the Ritz was chaos, with hairstylists, makeup artists, photographers, and Rachel's 5 other bridesmaids all talking over each other. Rachel sat in the center of it all like a queen holding court, her hair in enormous rollers, her face being transformed by professionals who charged more per hour than most people made in a day. She was radiant, happier than I'd ever seen her, talking about how Marcus had sent her a beautiful letter that morning, promising to love her forever. I held that letter in my hands, recognizing the handwriting as belonging to his best man, not Marcus himself. My mother fluttered around the room, adjusting everything, her own elegant mother-of-the-bride dress making her look 10 years younger. She kept talking about how proud my father would be when he walked Rachel down the aisle, how this was the wedding they'd always dreamed of for their daughter. The photographer captured every moment, the champagne toasts, the gift exchanges, the tears of joy. I smiled for every photo, hugged Rachel when she needed reassurance, held her hand when she had a moment of nervousness. Inside, I was screaming, watching the clock tick toward the moment when I would either save my sister or let her walk into a marriage built on deception. At noon, 2 hours before the ceremony, I pulled Rachel aside. We stood on the balcony overlooking Central Park, just the 2 of us, like we used to when we were kids sneaking onto the fire escape of our parents' apartment. I told her I needed to share something important, something that couldn't wait. Her face went from curious to concerned to furious as I told her about Marcus, about Elena, about the pregnancy, about the phone call I'd overheard. I showed her the photos Elena had sent me, the text messages between Marcus and Elena that Elena had forwarded in a moment of guilt. Rachel's face went white, then red, then white again. She gripped the balcony railing so hard her knuckles looked like they might burst through her skin. Then she said the words that changed everything. She looked me straight in the eye, her voice deadly calm, and said she already knew. She had known for months. She had hired a private investigator after finding suspicious charges on Marcus's credit card, and she knew all about Elena, about the apartment in Brooklyn, about the pregnancy. She knew Marcus was after her money, knew he was planning to leave after getting access to her trust fund. But she also knew something else, something that made her smile in a way that chilled me to my core. Rachel had been playing her own game, had already moved most of her trust fund into accounts Marcus didn't know about, had been documenting everything for the prenuptial agreement Marcus had refused to read carefully because he was so confident in his plan. She was going to marry him anyway. She was going to go through with the whole ceremony, the reception, the honeymoon, everything. Because, as she explained with a voice dripping with venom, she wanted Marcus to think he had won. She wanted him to believe his plan had worked perfectly. And then, after a few months of marriage, she would destroy him. She would reveal everything, take him for everything he had, expose him to his family, his colleagues, everyone. She would make sure Elena knew exactly who she had chosen to have a child with. Rachel's revenge would be slow, methodical, and complete. The wedding wasn't a celebration of love. It was the opening move in a chess game Marcus didn't even know he was playing. I stood there, stunned, watching my sister transform into someone I didn't recognize. This wasn't about love or heartbreak or even betrayal anymore. This was about power, control, and cruelty. I asked her about our parents, about the money they'd spent, about the guests who were coming to celebrate what they thought was real love. She laughed, that same tinkling laugh, and said they would never have to know. As far as everyone was concerned, she and Marcus would have a beautiful wedding and a perfect marriage, at least for a while. She told me I could either support her or stay silent, but if I said anything to anyone, she would never forgive me. She would cut me out of her life completely, tell our parents I had tried to sabotage her wedding out of jealousy, make sure everyone knew I was the bitter older sister who couldn't stand to see her happy. The makeup artist called for Rachel to come back inside for touch-ups. She squeezed my hand, her manicured nails digging into my skin, and whispered that she was counting on me to be the perfect maid of honor, to smile, to give a beautiful speech, to play my part. As she walked back into the suite, her bridal robe flowing behind her, I realized I was trapped. If I exposed Marcus, I would also be exposing Rachel's cold calculation. If I said nothing, I would be complicit in this twisted game. Either way, I would be standing at that altar, watching two people who despised each other promise to love and cherish until death do them part, knowing that every word was a lie. 2:00 arrived with military precision. The string quartet began playing, the guests rose to their feet, and the wedding processional began. I walked down that aisle, my burgundy dress feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds, my bouquet trembling in my hands. Marcus stood at the altar, looking like he'd stepped out of a magazine, his smile perfect, his confidence absolute. The other bridesmaids had no idea what was happening beneath the surface. They whispered about how handsome Marcus looked, how lucky Rachel was, how this was the wedding of the century. I took my place at the altar and turned to watch my sister make her entrance. Rachel appeared in the doorway, like a vision, her dress a masterpiece of silk and lace that had taken 6 months to create. Our father walked beside her, tears streaming down his face, so proud of his beautiful daughter. The guests gasped at how stunning she looked. Phones appeared despite the no photography request, and the wedding march swelled to fill the ballroom. Rachel's face was serene, her smile beatific, every inch the blushing bride. Only I could see the coldness in her eyes when they met Marcus's, the slight tightening of her jaw when he took her hand. To everyone else, they looked like two people madly in love. To me, they looked like two predators circling each other, waiting to see who would strike first. The ceremony proceeded flawlessly. The officiant, a family friend who had known Rachel since she was born, spoke about the power of love, about commitment, about building a life together. Marcus and Rachel exchanged vows they had written themselves, each word carefully crafted to sound sincere. Marcus spoke about Rachel being his light in the darkness, his reason for being, his forever. Rachel spoke about Marcus being her rock, her safe harbor, her destiny. The guests dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. My mother clutched my father's hand, overwhelmed with emotion, and I stood there, feeling like I was watching a performance, a carefully rehearsed play where everyone knew their lines except the audience. When the officiant asked if anyone had any objections, there was a moment of perfect silence. My heart pounded so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. This was my last chance to stop this charade, to tell the truth, to save everyone from the destruction that was coming. I felt Rachel's eyes on me, warning, threatening, pleading all at once. I saw my parents' faces, so full of joy, so innocent of what was really happening. I thought about Elena, probably watching the clock in Brooklyn, waiting for Marcus to text her that it was done. And I thought about the 400 guests who had come here believing in love, in happiness, in the promise of forever. I opened my mouth, and everyone turned to look at me. Rachel's hand tightened on her bouquet, her knuckles white beneath her French manicure. Marcus raised an eyebrow, a flicker of concern crossing his perfect features. The officiant looked confused, waiting to see if I was actually going to speak. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. And then I heard myself speaking, my voice clear and strong in the hushed ballroom. I said I had something important to share, something that couldn't wait another moment, something everyone needed to hear before this ceremony continued. Rachel's face went pale, then flushed with rage. She started to speak, to tell me to be quiet, but I was already moving, stepping forward, taking the microphone from the officiant. I looked out at the sea of faces, all these people dressed in their finest clothes, expecting to witness a celebration of love. And I told them everything. I told them about Marcus and Elena, about the pregnancy, about the lies and deception. I told them about Rachel knowing everything and planning her revenge. I told them about the money, the manipulation, the careful construction of a marriage that was nothing more than a business transaction wrapped in white lace and false promises. The ballroom erupted in chaos. My mother fainted, caught at the last second by my father, who looked like he had aged 10 years in 10 seconds. Marcus's parents stormed toward the altar, his mother screaming about defamation, his father already on the phone with their lawyer. Rachel stood frozen, her bouquet falling from her hands, roses scattering across the white runner. Marcus tried to speak, to deny everything, but Elena chose that moment to walk into the ballroom. She wasn't in a server's uniform this time. She was wearing a simple black dress, her pregnancy just starting to show, her face a mixture of heartbreak and determination. The confrontation that followed was unlike anything I had ever witnessed. Rachel found her voice and unleashed years of suppressed rage, not just at Marcus, but at everyone. She screamed about the pressure to be perfect, to find the perfect husband, to have the perfect wedding. She talked about how our parents had made her feel like she was nothing without a ring on her finger, how society had taught her that her value was tied to the man she married. Marcus tried to salvage something, anything, spinning stories about misunderstandings and miscommunications, but Elena had brought receipts, literally. She had printed emails, text messages, bank statements, everything that proved Marcus had been living a double life. The guests didn't know whether to leave or stay, creating a strange tableau of people in formal wear, watching the complete destruction of what was supposed to be the social event of the season. Some were filming on their phones, probably already uploading to social media. Others were trying to comfort my parents, who looked like their entire world had collapsed. The wedding planner, Vivian, stood in the corner, frantically making phone calls, probably trying to figure out the legal implications of canceling a reception for 400 people with food already being plated in the kitchen next door. Rachel turned to me then, her makeup running down her face in black streams, her carefully styled hair coming undone. She asked me why I had done this, why I had ruined everything. I told her the truth, that I couldn't stand there and watch her enter into a marriage built on mutual destruction. I couldn't let our parents spend the rest of their lives believing in a lie. I couldn't let Elena raise a child with a father who saw people as pawns in his personal chess game. And I couldn't let my sister become someone so consumed with revenge that she lost herself completely. I told her I loved her too much to let her go through with this, even if it meant she would hate me forever. Marcus tried to leave, to simply walk out of the ballroom and disappear, but Elena blocked his path. She told him he was going to be a father, that he had responsibilities, that he couldn't just run away from the mess he had created. His parents tried to intervene, his mother actually attempting to physically push Elena aside, which resulted in my father, mild-mannered accountant that he was, stepping between them and telling them in no uncertain terms that they needed to control themselves or he would call security. It was surreal, watching my father, who had never raised his voice in his life, standing up to these people who thought their money and status made them untouchable. The next hour was a blur of conversations, arguments, and negotiations. The wedding planner managed to convince most of the guests to move to the reception hall, where they could at least eat the expensive food that had already been prepared. It was the most awkward reception in history, people eating caviar and drinking champagne while discussing what they had just witnessed. Rachel locked herself in the bridal suite, refusing to speak to anyone except our mother, who spent an hour trying to coax her out. Marcus and his family left, their lawyer already on the phone discussing damage control. Elena sat in the lobby, crying while talking to her sister on the phone, trying to figure out what to do next. I found myself standing on the balcony where Rachel had told me her plan just hours earlier, looking out at Central Park as the sun began to set. My father joined me, still in his tuxedo, looking older and more tired than I'd ever seen him. He asked me if I had done the right thing, and I honestly didn't know how to answer. I had saved Rachel from a marriage that would have destroyed her, but I had also humiliated her in front of everyone she knew. I had exposed Marcus for who he really was, but I had also devastated Elena, who was now facing single motherhood with a man who had proven himself incapable of honesty. I had told the truth, but the truth had left nothing but wreckage in its wake. My mother appeared an hour later, her makeup repaired, but her eyes still red from crying. She told me Rachel wanted to see me. I found my sister sitting on the floor of the bridal suite, still in her wedding dress, surrounded by the debris of what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. The photographer had long since fled, leaving behind equipment in his haste to escape the chaos. Rachel looked up at me with eyes that held a mixture of rage, hurt, and something else I couldn't quite identify. She asked me if I was satisfied, if I had gotten what I wanted, if I was happy now that I had destroyed everything. I sat down beside her on that expensive carpet, my bridesmaid dress pooling around me like spilled wine. I told her that happiness wasn't what I felt. I felt heartbroken for her, for the dream that had turned into a nightmare. I felt guilty for the pain I had caused our parents, for the money they had wasted, for the embarrassment they would have to endure. I felt angry at Marcus for his deception, at Elena for her willingness to be complicit, at the whole situation that had forced me to choose between silence and truth. But I also felt something else, a small kernel of relief that it was over, that the lies had been exposed, that everyone could stop pretending. Rachel was quiet for a long time, picking at the beading on her dress, each tiny pearl that fell another reminder of what had been lost. Then she told me something that broke my heart all over again. She said she had known her relationship with Marcus wasn't real love, not the kind our parents had, not the kind she had dreamed about as a little girl. But she had convinced herself it was enough, that companionship and financial security and social status could substitute for genuine connection. She had been so desperate to not be the single sister anymore, to not be the one everyone pitied at family gatherings, that she had been willing to settle for a lie. And when she found out about Marcus's deception, instead of walking away, she had doubled down, turned it into a game, because at least then she could pretend she was in control. We sat there for hours, two sisters in formal wear in a luxury hotel suite, talking about love and lies and the pressure to be perfect. Rachel told me about the nights she had cried herself to sleep, knowing Marcus was with Elena, but forcing herself to smile the next morning. She told me about the wedding planning, how it had become an obsession, because if the wedding was perfect, maybe she could pretend the marriage would be too. She told me about our parents, how their constant questions about when she would get married had made her feel like a failure, like her doctorate and successful career meant nothing without a ring on her finger. And she told me about the revenge plan, how it had made her feel powerful for the first time in years, like she was finally the one writing the script. As the night wore on, other people started arriving, our aunts and uncles trying to understand what had happened. Rachel's best friends from college, offering support and wine they had smuggled from the reception. Even Marcus's sister appeared, not to defend her brother, but to apologize, to say she had suspected something was wrong but hadn't wanted to believe it. The bridal suite became a strange sort of gathering, people in formal wear sitting on the floor, eating room service, discussing the spectacular collapse of what was supposed to be the wedding of the year. Social media was already exploding with videos and photos, the story going viral before the reception had even officially ended. Elena appeared around midnight, hesitant, standing in the doorway like she wasn't sure if she would be welcome. To my surprise, Rachel invited her in. The two women who had been unknowingly sharing a man sat facing each other, and instead of the confrontation I expected, they just looked tired. Elena apologized for her part in the deception, for believing Marcus's lies, for thinking she could build happiness on someone else's misery. Rachel apologized for planning to use Elena's pregnancy as part of her revenge, for not warning her about Marcus sooner, for the whole twisted situation. They didn't become friends, that would have been too much to expect, but they reached an understanding. Two women who had been manipulated by the same man, who had both lost something in the wreckage. The sun was rising again by the time everyone finally left. Rachel and I were alone in the suite, still in our formal wear, looking like survivors of some elegant disaster. She told me she didn't know if she could forgive me, not yet, maybe not ever. But she also said she understood why I had done it, that maybe, in a twisted way, I had saved her from something worse than public humiliation. I had saved her from becoming someone she wouldn't recognize, someone capable of the kind of calculated cruelty she had been planning. She said she needed time, space, to figure out who she was without Marcus, without the wedding, without the carefully constructed image she had been maintaining for so long. Our parents took us home that morning, all of us cramming into their sedan like we used to when we were kids, except now we were in wrinkled formal wear instead of school uniforms. The city was just waking up, people heading to Sunday brunch, joggers in Central Park, life continuing as if the world hadn't just imploded. My mother kept reaching back to touch our hands, like she needed to make sure we were real, that we were still there. My father drove in silence, occasionally meeting my eyes in the rearview mirror with a look that was equal parts disappointment and understanding. The aftermath was brutal. The story made the society pages of every major newspaper, the New York Times running a piece about modern wedding culture and the pressure to create perfect social media moments. Marcus's family threatened lawsuits that never materialized. His company quietly transferred him to their London office, hoping distance would minimize the scandal. Elena had the baby, a little girl she named Sophie, and last I heard, she was raising her with the help of her family, Marcus paying child support, but having no other involvement. The vendors were paid, the dress was donated to charity, and the flowers were sent to local hospitals, my mother insisting that something beautiful should come from all that waste. Rachel threw herself into her work, accepting a position with Doctors Without Borders that took her to South Sudan for 6 months. She sent occasional emails, photos of herself covered in dust but smiling, real smiles, not the practiced one she had worn for the wedding photographer. She was helping people, making a real difference, finding purpose in something that had nothing to do with marriage or social status or revenge. Our parents worried about her being so far away, but I could see she needed the distance, needed to be somewhere where no one knew about the wedding that wasn't, where she could just be Dr. Rachel Thompson, not the bride who had been betrayed, or the woman who had planned elaborate revenge. I went back to my life too, my studio apartment in Queens that suddenly felt like a palace compared to the emotional prison Rachel had been living in. But things were different. The family dinners were quieter, conversations more careful. There was a Rachel-shaped hole in every gathering, her absence a constant reminder of that day. Some relatives blamed me for ruining everything, for not minding my own business. Others thanked me for having the courage to speak the truth. Most just didn't know what to say, so they said nothing, and the silence was almost worse than the arguments. 6 months after the wedding, I received a package from South Sudan. Inside was a photo of Rachel with a group of children at the clinic where she worked, and a letter. She wrote about the heat, the challenges, the rewards of her work. She wrote about learning to be alone with herself, to sit with her thoughts without the constant noise of social expectations. She wrote about forgiveness, not just for Marcus or Elena or me, but for herself, for the woman who had been so desperate for approval that she had been willing to marry someone she knew was lying to her. And at the end, she wrote that she was coming home for Christmas, that maybe we could start over, not as the sisters we had been, but as the women we were becoming. Christmas Eve found our family gathered around the same table where wedding plans had once dominated every conversation. Rachel was there, thinner, tanner, her hair cut short in a practical style that actually suited her better than all those elaborate wedding updos ever had. She talked about her work, about the children she was helping, about the simplified life she had discovered. There was no mention of Marcus, of the wedding, of that horrible, beautiful day in June. It was like we had all agreed to a collective amnesia, at least for one night, to pretend we were just a normal family having a normal holiday dinner. After dinner, Rachel and I walked through our old neighborhood, past the coffee shop where she had asked me to be her maid of honor, past the church where we had planned to have the rehearsal dinner before switching to the fancy restaurant, past all the landmarks of our shared history. She linked her arm through mine, something she hadn't done since we were teenagers, and told me she had met someone in South Sudan. Not a romantic someone, she was quick to clarify, but a friend, another doctor who had also fled a life that had become unbearable. They talked about their pasts, their mistakes, their hopes for something different. She said it was the first honest relationship she'd had in years, built on truth rather than performance. We stopped at the park where we used to play as children, sitting on swings that seemed impossibly small now. Rachel said she had been thinking about that day, about standing at the altar, about the moment I had taken the microphone. She said she had been terrified, furious, but also, in a strange way, relieved. She had been standing there in that dress that cost more than some people's cars, about to legally bind herself to someone she had grown to hate, and she had been praying for something, anything, to stop it from happening. She said I had been the answer to a prayer she hadn't even known she was making, the disaster that had saved her from a worse disaster. As we sat there in the cold December night, I thought about the complexity of truth, how it could be both destructive and liberating, cruel and kind. I thought about the stories we tell ourselves, the lies we accept to avoid difficult realities. I thought about Marcus, probably in London, telling some new woman a new story. I thought about Elena, spending her first Christmas as a mother, creating new traditions with Sophie. I thought about our parents, who had learned to speak about the wedding as the day Rachel was saved, rather than the day she was humiliated. And I thought about Rachel and me, two sisters who had gone through fire and come out different, but still connected. The story made the rounds at holiday parties for years. People who had been there told and retold it, each version slightly different, the details shifting with each telling. Some painted me as the hero who had saved my sister from a terrible marriage. Others saw me as the villain who had destroyed a young woman's happiness out of jealousy or spite. Rachel became either a victim or a mastermind, depending on who was telling the story. Marcus was universally condemned, though I heard he had married someone else in London, someone who presumably didn't know about his past. Elena disappeared from most versions, reduced to a footnote, the other woman who had complicated an already complex situation. But the truth, the real truth that only Rachel and I knew, was messier than any of those stories. There were no heroes or villains, just people making terrible decisions for complicated reasons. Rachel had been both victim and perpetrator, planning revenge while drowning in her own pain. Marcus had been a liar and a user, but also someone desperate enough to build an elaborate deception rather than face his own financial problems. Elena had been naive and complicit, but also a woman in love who had believed promises that should never have been made. And I had been both savior and destroyer, speaking truth that needed to be heard, but causing devastation in the process. Years later, at Rachel's real wedding, a small ceremony in her backyard with only 20 guests, she asked me to be her maid of honor again. This time, there were no designer dresses, no imported flowers, no string quartet. She wore a simple sundress she had bought off the rack, and her fiancé, a fellow doctor she had met at a medical conference, wore jeans and a button-down shirt. They had written their own vows, simple promises about honesty, support, and partnership. When the officiant asked if anyone objected, Rachel caught my eye and winked, and we both started laughing, much to the confusion of the other guests who didn't know the story. At the reception, which was really just a barbecue with good friends and close family, Rachel pulled me aside. She said she had been thinking about forgiveness, about how it wasn't a single moment, but a process, something you had to choose again and again. She said she had forgiven me the day she realized that my betrayal had actually been an act of love, that I had sacrificed our relationship to save her from herself. She said she had forgiven Marcus too, not because he deserved it, but because carrying that anger was exhausting. She had even forgiven Elena, understanding that they had both been victims of the same deception. But most importantly, she had forgiven herself for being human, for wanting to be loved so badly that she had been willing to accept a counterfeit version. Looking back now, years removed from that June day when everything fell apart, I understand that sometimes destruction is necessary for reconstruction. The wedding that never was became the catalyst for Rachel to build an authentic life, one where she didn't need to perform perfection. Our parents learned to value their daughters for who they were, rather than who they married. Our family became stronger, built on truth rather than pretense. And Rachel and I developed a relationship based on honesty, even when that honesty was painful. We learned that love sometimes means being willing to be the villain in someone's story, if it means saving them from a worse fate. The burgundy bridesmaid dress still hangs in my closet, a reminder of the day I chose truth over comfort, family over facade, Sometimes I look at it and remember standing at that altar, feeling the weight of the decision, the moment when I could have stayed silent and let the performance continue. But silence would have been its own kind of lie, a complicity in the destruction that was already underway. Speaking the truth had been an act of violence in its own way, but it had also been an act of love, the kind of love that refuses to let someone you care about walk into disaster, even if they hate you for stopping them.